Over the last couple of weeks, I've been talking about minor characters in the Old Testament, from Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, to the unnamed widow of Zarephath who took care of Elijah the prophet. This week we'll take a look at some minor, even obscure characters in the New Testament. There are a lot of Old Testament names that pop up in the New Testament, but I won't focus on these, only folks who actually appear in the New Testament itself. Today, a character whose name you probably don't even remember. His name? Mnason. His name appears just once, but what we know about him, though little, is important. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional from Monday, August 14th, 2023. Over the years, I've stayed in the homes of many church members. Sometimes I've stayed in the homes of people when I've either interviewed at a church or when I've been called to ministry in a place and have moved to town but haven't yet found a place to live. Other times I've stayed in people's homes when I have been what they call a visiting fireman, someone who fills a pulpit in a church that's too far to drive on a Sunday morning. This was especially common when I was in seminary, and the seminary would send some of us out to represent the school in churches around Virginia and the Carolinas. And still other times, I've stayed in the homes of people when I've taken a group, often a youth group, on a mission trip. During my years in Mississippi, we took an annual trip to a little church in Chihuahua, Mexico, either to help with some construction project or to do a vacation Bible school. All of us would stay in homes, often very modest, of church members there. What all these experiences have in common is that someone extended hospitality to a stranger, someone with whom they had only a slight connection, and their main connection was a common faith and a web of relationships that assured them that we who were visiting were trustworthy. It also assured us who were visiting that we were safe and secure in the protection of their homes. One thing we know about the Apostle Paul is that he traveled a lot. From the book of Acts, we can follow his travels pretty well. One thing we know about his travels is that, especially when he visited a place for a short time, he almost always stayed in the homes of one of the believers in the city. Then, as now, traveling evangelists and preachers relied on the hospitality of strangers for shelter and protection. One of the people with whom Paul stayed was a man named Mnason. It was during one of his trips to Jerusalem. This was the visit when Paul was arrested, nearly lynched by the crowds, and almost flogged by the Roman guards before being sent to the coastal city of Caesarea to testify before Felix, then the Roman governor after Pontius Pilate. As dramatic as the story is, though, it begins with these simple details. After these days, we got ready and started to go up to Jerusalem. Some of the disciples from Caesarea also came along and brought us to the house of Mnason of Cyprus, an early disciple with whom we were to stay. Paul could no doubt have stayed in the homes of many of the Christians in Jerusalem, but it was to the house of Mnason that he and his entourage went for lodging and hospitality. We know exactly two things about Mnason from this brief passage. First, he was from the island of Cyprus, the same place Barnabas, one of the earliest followers of Jesus, was from. And we know that Mnason was, quote, an early disciple of Jesus. How and why he came to live in Jerusalem we do not know. Perhaps, like Barnabas, he became a leader in the church in Jerusalem. We just don't know. But one thing we do know, though it is not immediately obvious, is Mnason was willing to risk his life and his safety for the sake of the gospel. To read the chapters after we meet Mnason is to read about Paul's difficulties in Jerusalem. He was arrested, almost lynched, was almost flogged by the Roman authorities, and finally was forced to go to the Roman governor in Caesarea. It could not have escaped anyone's notice that Paul had been staying in the home of Mnason. This would certainly have placed him and his household at risk. Was he also arrested? Did he face torture or trial? Did he face an angry mob in Jerusalem who wanted to lynch him? We'll never know. But there's no particular reason for the writer of Acts to include this little detail about where they stayed when they came to Jerusalem. No reason except to note that an otherwise unknown follower of Jesus placed himself and his household at risk in order to provide hospitality to Paul and to his entourage. For this, his name deserves to be remembered. Mnason, an early disciple of Jesus, and among the first to open his home to visiting Christians, a practice that still happens today. Tomorrow, Judas. No, not that Judas. Judas who lived on Straight Street in Damascus. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.